Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Scavenger Road. We're back on track. Excellent.
We're back on track in that we can't even see the track anymore. It's kind of been washed away by the rain. Yeah. I'm lost. You're trying to point out that I'm lost and I won't listen to you. This sounds like a Lexitecture episode.
Yeah, there we go. My word is road. R-O-A-D, the noun. And this is one of those... This is one of those simple words, and now that you've become fully immersed in Doctor Who, I've decided I'm going to call these TARDIS words because they're little words, but they cram an impossible amount of stuff in them.
Love it.
And, I mean, it's a very common word, just a path marked out for vehicular traffic from places to other places. Metaphorical use, road to redemption, all that stuff, which is the same idea, but just in allegory.
I'm so excited because this is either going to be old as dirt and fucking cool, or it's going to be much more recent than I think, which is also fucking cool.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, obviously roads as a concept are very old. The Romans were quite good at them. And generally the ability to get from places to other places is fairly integral to the development of society. So... it's not all that surprising that road goes back to ye olde English times.
Nice.
It's very, very old. What might be surprising is that in the said ye olde English times, road meant the action or an act of riding on horseback. Also, a period of riding, a journey on horseback, a ride. Ooh. So if you were on a road, it was just you were riding a horse.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. The other side of this is that there was a specific sense, and fairly common, where road, that act of riding, inherently involved riding somewhere with hostile intent, i.e. a raid.
Ooh, cool.
So like making inroads, for instance, kind of a sort of invasion sense to that. It was the only thing I could think of that still sort of had... even an inkling of that kind of sense, but I might just be making that up and seeing That's connections really cool. Where there aren't any. But yeah, so a road was a raid most of the time in Old English, in the Old English period. Sidebar, the word raid, meaning what it means now and what it's more or less always meant, was fairly common in English until it eventually faded into obscurity and was basically just head wilted on the vine by about 1600.
Oh.
Yeah, and just was more or less gone. And the guy who is credited with reintroducing it into common parlance is none other than your very own Sir Walter Scott. So Walter Scott brought it back.
Interesting.
And through that little gem back into English, which is it's kind of cool to think about because you hear people talk about, and I do it all the time, and language lovers and word nerds and stuff all over the place do it, where we find these old words and you're like, man, that should come back. That should be a thing. Why isn't that a word? Why aren't we using that word anymore?
Because you're not Walter Scott.
Well, that's it. It's because basically. I can use scurry funge all I want, and I do, but it's not, I'm not bringing it back but then again, I also don't have, and never will, the world's second largest monument to a writer dedicated to me.
I know very little about Sir Walter Scott, which I have to say is deeply shameful as someone who A, is Scottish, B, has a degree in literature and language, C, has a podcast about language, E, any sort of person who loves... Walter Scott is often credited with being the first novelist.
Yeah.
He's credited with being the the guy who first did that thing, which is fucking crazy to me. It is wild. And I've read Kidnapped, which Kidnapped is such a, like, it's on the reading list for the national exams in Scotland. It's one of the set texts for the national exams in Scotland, which doesn't mean that every child in Scotland reads it, but probably should.
Right. Yeah.
And let's not forget that Kidnapped is also fucking great. It's great in the adventures, the kind of adventure films that don't get made very often anymore, but that really should, because everybody enjoys a bit of a swashbuckle going on.
Oh, of course.
And it's a great story. It's a great book. But also he has a huge body of work, most of which I've never even tickled. But also I discovered last year in, I believe it was Glasgow Airport, it may have been Edinburgh, I can't remember. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. My entire life I have believed that was a Shakespeare quote, and it is not. It is a Walter Scott quote.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The other thing about Walter Scott repopularising the word raid, that's really cool to me, but I'm a little bit disappointed because he could have gone Scots, and in Scots the term is reivin. R-E-I-V-E, rave. And given, if you lived near the border with England, which was not a particularly fixed thing for quite a few centuries,
yeah, no kidding,
reavers would appear and make life difficult for you in both directions. But the Scots word is reivin, and I quite like reivin.
Yeah, well, actually, when we were in Scotland, which was 10 years ago now, which is wild, we did a Rabbi's tour, and our tour guide was amazing, first of all. And we went down onto the sort of borders region in the north of England and stuff. And he told us it was Becca and I, and it was a German couple, and that was it. It was just the four of us. So it was kind of like just a private tour, which was awesome. And he actually said that he pointed out, so I knew that the reiving, I knew that because he talked about that, because we're in that region. And he said that's where the word bereaved, bereavement comes from, someone who has been reaved.
Oh, that's so awesome.
So you're sad because they came over and they took all your stuff and murdered all of your people. And so you're then suffering from bereavement. And so that's where that comes from too, cool. Which is very neat. I was like, that is awesome.
Love it.
Yeah, it was great. Anyway, road. So there's another sense of road that was sort of showing up in English by the mid 1300s. Apparently it is still in use today. I'm not familiar with it because I'm not a seafaring chap, but it means a place where ships ride is how the OED puts it. And then it says, now usually in plural, a sheltered piece of water near the shore where vessels may lie at anchor in safety, a roadstead.
That's very lovely. Also, I kind of wish you were a seafaring chap.
Yeah, me too sometimes.
Just mainly because I don't know any seafaring chaps, and I feel like they'd be pretty awesome.
I think they probably would be.
You're pretty awesome, so therefore,
I could probably be a seafaring chap.
You are but young. There are lots of things you could achieve yet and turn your hand to.
Well, and I feel like the best seafaring chaps are old and grizzled, and I do have some time to become old and grizzled.
Exactly.
More so.
Yeah.
We'll mark that in the maybe drawer.
List, please.
Yeah. It wasn't until around 1580 that the word is commonly associated with according to the OED, quote, a path or way between different places. So it had quite a long run before it gets to that point. By 1720, it had been narrowed even more. So it was a path specifically for vehicles as opposed to pedestrians or what have you. Because you wouldn't really call, or I don't think, if you had a walking path, like a hiking trail, I don't know of anyone who would call that a road. I feel like the vehicular access is kind of integral to it.
That's
and
interesting.
That was sort of early 1700s.
Because what immediately popped into my head there was there's a very, very famous, very well-trodden Scots hiking path called Jock's Road.
Neat.
And Jock's Road is very much not a vehicular access kind of thing. However, I do find myself wondering if it might have been used for sheep.
Well, and also you live where the history comes from, so that path has probably been there since before road as a word was narrowed to being just vehicles. Possibly.
But I'm curious about that. I don't know enough about it, but
like in Scottish terms, 1720 was yesterday.
That's true. That is interesting because I was fascinated as a kid by the fact that there was more than one name for streets, you know?
Yeah.
And right now I live on a road, as in it's on the street sign, road.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I've lived in a place and an avenue. Ross was brought up in a terrace. And I was always so fascinated by the fact that I guess, when you first learn to read, those are the things that, those are the things you see around you. Road signs are, little kids sit in cars and look at road signs, or I certainly did.
Yeah.
And I always felt like road was like the OG.
Yeah.
Like the big ones, the most important ones tended to be roads.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I don't know. You're right. I mean, a path is not a road. Those things are not the same. But
yeah,
I do wonder why Jock's Road is called Jock's Road. Anyway,
this specific use of vehicles only type of thing sent me down another rabbit hole. But I figured, A, we don't tend to worry too much about going down rabbit holes, and B, this one involves anatomy and the 1800s, so I thought you particularly would enjoy this a lot.
Academic noises.
Yeah. So the third OED citation of this sense of road is dated 1826, and because of the contents of the sentence that I'm about to unveil for you, I immediately had to find out more, because the sentence just reads, "He would lie down in the road, let a carriage wheel go over him, and get back up again." And it is from an issue of The Lancet, like the medical publication.
Please do tell me everything.
So I was like, okay, I got to know more about this. This guy sounds awesome. What is happening? And why is it in The Lancet? It's not like the Tribune or like... Anyway, so because we live in the future and because something has to outweigh the terribleness of life in the future, I could find the December 1826 issue of The Lancet.
Delightful.
And I can now read you the passage that it comes from. So it is about the serratus magnus, which is a muscle in your chest that connects ribs to stuff. I am
immediately very curious because there is no serratus magnus, as far as I'm aware. But there is the serratus. I don't know if it was once called serratus magnus, but there is an anterior serratus and there is a posterior serratus. I think
that it's now the anterior serratus is what this is. I think
this was called.
But,
awesome.
I'm going to read you from the 1826.
Super cool already.
Yeah. So here's what it says about the serratus magnus. To understand fully the action of this muscle, you should have pictured before you the fibers of the muscle. It is to draw the whole scapula downwards and to fix it most firmly against the sides of the chest. Looking at the skeleton, you would say the scapula is not fixed at all, but then in the subject it is fixed most firmly by the muscles and especially by the serratus magnus. What is it that supports the shoulder when you see a man carrying a large weight, perhaps of 100 pounds, upon it? It is this muscle. This account supposes the ribs to be fixed and the scapula the movable part, but it may be just the reverse. At a country fair, You see a mountebank submitting to have an anvil put on his chest and a horseshoe hammered upon it. What is it that enables him to do that? 1, is it the elasticity of the ribs? Yes, to a certain extent. Is it the cartilaginous nature of the chest? Yes, to a certain extent, but it is especially this muscle, the serratus magnus. During the time Dr. Hunter, I don't know who that is, was teaching anatomy in London.
Whoa. You don't know who Dr. Hunter is?
I don't. Am I about to get a lesson?
Dr. Hunter, Dr. Hunter's house is believed to have been the inspiration for Dr. Jekyll's house in Jekyll and Hyde.
Oh.
William Hunter, couldn't remember, Scottish anatomist and physician, because all the anatomists were Scottish. I might be telling a lie. There was William Hunter and there was John Hunter. I'm not sure which one is the Jekyll and Hyde house, but the Hunterian Museum, which is a museum of anatomy and bodies, is named after Dr. Hunter.
Okay.
Like absolute
Neat.
rock star of anatomy.
There you go.
Sorry,
so during the time that Dr. Hunter was teaching anatomy in London, there was a man that used to go about the town performing this feat. He would lie down in the road, let a carriage wheel go over him, and get up again without its having hurt him. The name he got was certainly a very appropriate name. He was called Leather-Coated Jack. It happened that when he died, he was taken to Dr. Hunter's theatre for dissection, and the only difference between him and any other person was the enormous thickness of his serratus magnus.
Nice.
So, settle down, ladies.
I've just Googled, and serratus magnus is now the muscle that we now know as serratus anterior, which is indeed a super duper cool muscle. I don't know if you've been watching the Olympics.
Not really.
The swimming events have just they're just sort of drawn to a close. But if you ever want to see a serratus anterior, swimmers are generally a pretty good example. People, if a person is fairly muscular but also quite lean, then you'll be able to see it. So the easiest way to see a serratus anterior is if a person's got their hands up, as if they were making their arms into wings, and down the very side of their chest there are muscular fibres that sort of look like feathers.
Oh, okay.
That's the serratus anterior.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like
Neat.
that account a whole lot for lots of reasons. Firstly, because the idea that in 1827 doctors were going, what does this guy actually do? Do you think it does this? Maybe it does that. Feels absolutely wild to me, because I think you do sort of assume that doctors know what they're talking about. You know? And that's like, that is particularly hilarious from a musculoskeletal point of view, because there is no medical speciality. Like, there is no ologist for musculoskeletal injury and complaint. There are gynecologists who are doctors of women. There are, trying to think, can't think of any medical specialities.
Cardiologists.
They look after children. There are, you don't say nephrologists, what do you say? There are endocrinologists. There are, and these cover major systems of the body. They cover the vascular system, or they cover the respiratory system, or this organ or that organ, or all the rest of it. But there is no myology. And if there was, I would wager, as a person who has more than a passing interest in musculoskeletal injury and function, I think it's a big fat hole that could really do with being filled.
Yeah, that seems weird.
Like, I don't know how it is in Canada, but back pain takes up a whole lot of hours missed from work, and pain and disability and all that sort of stuff. And if you go to the doctor with a sore back, the most likely thing that's going to happen is that you will be given painkillers. And that's that's a fairly typical. You might be told to exercise a bit more without very much more direction than that. And if you're lucky, you find a Pilates teacher who really knows what they're talking about and helps you out and gets you moving well. And otherwise, more movement is generally better than less movement. but it doesn't mean your back's going to stop hurting.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of a neat.
I kind of want to find somebody with a really thick serratus and roll a cart over them, because that's the sort of brain I have.
Which, in isolation and just in text, would be an incredibly ominous and threatening sentence.
Oh, I didn't say I wasn't terrifying.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. As long as we all know where we stand. I want to find that guy and roll a cart over him.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how often I think, wow, I wish I could cut that open?
Fair enough.
That must be so cool from the inside.
That's great.
Anyway.
Yeah. So etymology-wise, it's relatively straightforward. Road comes from the Proto-Indo-European root meaning to ride, which makes sense. An interesting, like a related word is ready or already, which the American Heritage Dictionary does put a caveat of probably in front of these.
Love it.
I figure in this realm, all of it is probably.
Yeah.
So I feel like that, I don't know how to take that, but those two are related to the Proto-Indo-European word for ride in the sense of having like prepared for a journey.
That's so cool.
If you're ready, you are ready to ride, which is kind of redundant. And just to wrap up, because it's been several months, I thought I would crack open Smith.
Hey!
Synonyms discriminated again.
Oh, Doctor, it's so wonderful to hear from you again.
Because he has road in grouped together with road, route, course, and way. And has some interesting things to say as always. So, Smith says, road is, strictly, a public way for horses and carriages, and when used metaphorically conveys the ideas of public or common recognition and directness of end, as in such phrases as the sure road to honor or to ruin.
Okay.
Route is a circular or circuitous travel which may consist of more than one road successively. Also makes a certain amount of sense. Mm-hmm. Course differs from route as the defined from the indefinite. A traveler finds his way to a town by a circuitous route. The sun runs its course. A road is fixed or marked naturally. A route is unmarked or unfixed. A course is fixed by necessity or by appointment. Yet route involves the idea of a line ordinary and frequented, as the overland route to India. Routes differ according to the different points or places by which one passes to the proposed destination. Way expresses broadly the general manner of travel. To go by coach, by railway, and by ship are different ways of traveling, but this is rather an analogical extension of the term. The term, especially in the plural, lends itself to moral meanings, good or evil ways, that is, modes of conduct. The way indicates primarily truth of proceeding. A certain road or path is spoken of as the way or not the way, which leads to such a place.
Oh my God, Smith. How do you take three or four very commonplace words and just spin them into magic?
And do that with them, yeah.
Yeah.
Like the concept that the way to get to a place, you use that because it is the correct and upstanding,
the morally approved route,
a priori platonic ideal of truth to go from one place to another is the way. I don't know. That's awesome. That's amazing.
I love it. I've just, something else has just popped into my head, road related. There is well, it's very famous around these parts. There's a folk song that popped into my head, and it's called The Road and the Miles to Dundee, which is, of course, my home city, yay Dundee. And The Road and the Miles to Dundee it tells the story of presumably a man who is walking, and he encounters a fair maiden who asks him the road and the miles to Dundee. In other words, she's asking him, what's the way and how far is it?
Right.
And that is the road and the miles. And I love that. I think it's one of these things where I'm like, oh, people should still say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's lovely and poetic and beautiful.
That's a great phrase.
Can you tell me the miles to such and such a place?
Yeah.
I guess the kilometres doesn't work quite as well, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't
That's a whole
roll off the tongue. But also, in Canada, we don't even, like, colloquially, most of the time in Canada, distances are measured in time.
I love that.
Like, I have no idea how many kilometers I live from the town close to us, but it doesn't matter, because if someone says how far away is Pembroke, I'd say it's 20 minutes. I live 15 minutes outside of town, which makes no sense because it's completely arbitrary based on how fast you're going and all the rest of the stuff. But
yeah,
it's just, here we are.
20-minute, 4-hour drive.
Yeah.
Which in Scotland is like, whoa. And in Canada is like, yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah, that's like, some people genuinely just drive 2 hours to get groceries, like special groceries, but still just groceries.
I mean, there are definitely places in Scotland where that holds true also. You know, driving for 4 hours doesn't necessarily mean covering, the same amount of miles or kilometres as you would on a highway, because most of this country is not highway,
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that time as distance does make sense when most people using those roads have access to roughly the same sort of vehicle, and speed limits are in place and traffic is generally fairly predictable and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So,
I love that
road.
road is to do with horse. How many words do you think are just to do with horses originally?
Probably a lot.
There's so many.
Horses are pretty important.
I got a really interesting email from Joel Neff this week, the Learned newsletter.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was talking about how many words you have to know of a language to be able to speak it,
Right.
versus how many words a native speaker tends to know, which of course is going to vary hugely from person to person. But like, how many words are there in English? I have no idea. Like, I couldn't even make a conservative guess.
Yeah.
Is it 1 million? Is it 500,000? Is it 5 million? Like, not a clue.
I think it's in the 300,000 or 400,000 range.
I mean, it's certainly lots.
It is lots. It's a bunch. More than 12.
And we have a lot of synonyms, so... and we steal a lot too. Good old-fashioned British tradition of taking shit and putting our name on it. But yeah, it's one, because he sort of said, like, he lives in Japan. He's like, I'm like an upper intermediate speaker of Japanese, so I can, like, take my car to get serviced, and I can complete my taxes, and I can do these sorts of things, but I only know maybe about 10,000 words. You're like,
right.
That feels like a lot, but also
does feel like a lot.
How many are there altogether? Yeah. Anyway, measurement of things. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm enjoying the old road.
Mm-hmm. I liked it.
So, what's the episode going to be called? First question to answer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you, because, like, when do I ever get to the point? No, don't think so. I have just taken a lovely, lovely holiday wherein I did a thing that I have always wanted to do. Well, for as long as I've known about Pompeii, I have wanted to visit Pompeii.
Right.
And we went and we visited Pompeii and Herculaneum, and we climbed Mount Vesuvius, and it was just all kinds of flavours of awesome. Also, don't go in the summer. It's so hot, you will die. Yeah. You know the point, like, I mean, we definitely discussed this in Korea because it was relevant there, but, like, the point at which you've sweated so much and you are sweating so much that you don't just feel like your clothes are wet, you feel like a shower is being poured onto you.
Yeah.
By some external source. I basically was like that for 3 days.
Jeez.
Yeah, in the process of getting around, getting to these places, visiting them, seeing them, doing all that stuff. It was it was crazy. However, so we went to Pompeii with a tour, and we took the train to Herculaneum and went by ourselves. Which meant that we spent a bit more time in Herculaneum than we did in Pompeii, but we saw a lot of stuff in Pompeii because we had a guide. And, you know, it's swings and roundabouts. You get different experiences of different things. But I did say it was probably a good idea for us to have a guide in Pompeii because it's a city. It's the size of a city. And if someone had said, OK, Amy, go and investigate, I'd probably have died of heat stroke.
Right. Right.
There aren't any lemonade stands. You know, there's nowhere to buy water once you're in the city. There's nowhere to sit down in the shade. Not very many places anyway. And it was like 35 degrees that day. So yeah, I probably would have died. But my God, what an incredible place! It was so awesome. And I immediately wanted to go back, and it was so great. However, the next day we got the train to go to Herculaneum, and we don't speak Italian, and we were trying to sort of navigate an unfamiliar public transport system, and that had its kind of pros and cons. It was interesting, but we knew that we had to get off at Ercolano, but there were 2 Ercolano stations.
Of course.
And the one that we needed was Scavi, Ercolano Scavi. And Scavi is an Italian word that means ruins. In that part of Italy, you see it quite a lot because obviously you cannot move for the ruins.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the waiters at our hotel got chatting to Ross one night, and they were talking about football because that's how men communicate. And and I mean soccer, but I hate that I have to translate that. And they were talking about the kind of the big team in that region is Napoli, but there is a team in Sorrento, of course, and they need a new stadium. And the waiter complained that they can't find ground for a stadium because there's all this damn archaeology all over the place. Which, like, I do kind of feel like that. You know, there's presumably some kind of government department that looks after all this stuff in Italy, and they genuinely must be like, oh, what? Another one? Fuck. I guess
feel like that's probably true.
The financial and logistical demands must be fairly significant. But anyway, so we were looking for scavi. And because I had to pay attention to this word, then obviously I saw it everywhere. Yeah. And my brain did that thing that my brain does, where it started to wonder about that word. And I'm like, oh, scavi. I wonder if that is where we get the word scavenger.
Interesting.
And so I had a look. I investigated.
Sweet.
And I discovered... Well, first of all, I discovered that while folk etymology is fun, it is wrong.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
I mean, it isn't always wrong. The word scavi has absolutely nothing to do with the word scavenger. But I thought it was quite an interesting little road between the two. So,
nice.
I started off with scavenger because I know much more about investigating the etymology of English words than I do the etymology of Italian words.
Right.
Quite
that
simply.
Seems fair.
And so I went to the OED, as one does. And I discovered that the word scavenger is, well, it's kind of got a spelling mistake.
Oh, neat.
It comes from the historical word, the earliest sense given in the OED is from 1547. And it is, in fact, scavenger, because a scavenger was one who collected scavenge, SCAVAG. The OED has an entry for both scavenge and scavenger without the N.
Yeah.
And historically, that's, you know, if we want to look at the proper etymology of this word, then this, I think, is where we need to start. And scavenge is, you know, we said, well, what's older than roads? Taxes.
Fair enough, yeah.
So the OED defines scavenge as a toll formerly levied by the mayor, sheriff or corporation of London and other towns on merchant strangers on goods offered for sale within their precincts. So in other words, if you come from wherever else, you come to London and say, yeah, I'm a merchant, I want to sell some stuff. They're like, cool, come on in. But by the way, you have to pay us this tax. And that tax was called scavenge. And scavenge is first cited in 1444. They pay scavenge for the same merchandises at Southampton. And it's from the Rolls of Parliament. So it was prohibited by Henry VII. And it's, you know, it is an obsolete word. It's in the OED for historical reasons. But scavenge and scavengers, scavenge and scavengers eventually lead us to this word. And when I had a look at Etym Online, I discovered a really cool little quirk of the word scavenger. And it's a little quirk that is shared by the word harbinger, passenger, messenger, and the very lovely porringer, which I'd never heard before. And it is that all of these words describe a thing that does a thing, or a person that does a thing. And all of these words have added an N.
Yeah.
That isn't there in the original thing. So a scavenger collected scavenge, no N. A passenger was a person buying passage.
Buying passage, yeah.
A pottinger.
Messenger.
Sorry,
Yeah,
a porringer or a pottinger. It's a porridge dish. So it's a dish from which you eat porridge.
Oh, okay.
And a harbinger is somebody looking for harbour.
Oh.
So a harbinger in the 15th century was someone sent ahead to arrange lodgings.
Oh, of
for
course.
an army or a king or something of that. And a herberger was a provider of shelter or an innkeeper in the 12th century. So
interesting.
None of these words contain the letter N, but all of the evolved words, harbinger, messenger and scavenger, have this N. And what's very interesting is, for all of these words, that extra N appears around about 1500. And nobody knows why. Just a thing.
That's so weird.
It's so weird, like, isn't it?
How?
And so cool. I love it.
How is that a thing? It's not even just once. If it was once, it's like this word went from scavenger to scavenger in 1512. And who cares why? It's one word. Somebody might have the keys are like right next to each other. It was just a typo, a manuscript O. And but a bunch of them.
And annoyingly, it's not like, you know, the sort of vowel shifts that have, you know, the kind of big rockstar etymology kind of events. As far as I could find out, I'm not saying that, you know, I have not made an exhaustive search of the entire research body of etymology, because I have a job. But as far as I can see, several places, Etym Online is the first place to mention this happening, and it's called the unetymological N. And I'm like, awesome, I'll Google that and find out more. And I Googled it and found out exactly nothing.
Yeah.
So either it has another name, and I'm not aware of that name, or it hasn't been included in the Etym Online entry or in the OED or anywhere else. But I don't really know why that's happened, and I don't really know if there is any sort of scholarship or kind of general theory about why it's happened. But it happened about 1500 to all of these words. Just because.
I don't know why. Like, usually I'm pretty chill with like of obscure origin, or, you know,
you're furious about this,
the murky past. This I'm furious about this. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why it bothers me, but I hate it.
And I kind of knew that you would hate it. And that's why when I started looking at this word, I was like, oh, it doesn't mean what I thought it mean. And Ryan's going to go crazy.
I'm so mad. How? How could there be no reason? Message to messenger does not...
The best I could kind of think, and
I'm so angry.
This isn't really a good explanation at all. I fully accept that this is not great, but like, you know the word sandwich,
Yeah.
Sandwich, like, do you generally say sandwich?
Yeah.
I generally say sandwich.
Yeah.
Okay, as though it was spelled with an M, and I think that's a fairly common thing, and so really the word should be sandwich, but also that's kind of because sandwich is an unusual spelling, and it's an unusual spelling because it comes from a place name, and the etymology of those guys just makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so it's probably more about trying to kind of get your mouth around what is essentially not a particularly obvious word and sound combination, rather than it is about just deciding you're going to change it. But then I also thought about, like, I don't know if you're aware of the English football team Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah.
Right? And they're named after Tottenham, which is an area in London, and it's spelled Tottenham, right?
Yeah.
But whenever my husband and I discuss that football team, or indeed that area, without fail, we call it Tottenham.
Oh, interesting.
Because it just, and it's one of these, like, but we're both just quite silly human beings, and we do this to a lot of words, Tottenham. Yeah. And, but it's one of these where the more you do it, the more you're like, it should be Tottenham, damn it.
Yeah.
Why isn't it? I'm going to call it that from now on, and hopefully other people will see the light and they will also, like, learn the correct way to pronounce this word. And I sort of hope that that's what happened to scavenger and messenger and all those other words. I hope that someone was like, you know what? No, we don't like it that way. We're going to have it this way. Suck it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the best that I've got for the unetymological N. There are a lot of unetymological notes about etymology, which I love, but the unetymological N, I did think might make you quite upset.
Yeah, I'm grumpy about that.
So here we are. So scavengers, however you want to go, they collected this tax.
Right.
Okay, and that's, you know, for a good long while, that's kind of how it was. However, it does seem to have either morphed, or this is what the tax was for. The OED first definition for scavenger without the N is an officer whose duty it was to take scavenge, and who was afterwards also charged with the duty of keeping the streets clean. And so this sense of cleaning things up kind of came upon the word. And I like this. I was like, oh, that's very interesting, pretty cool. The scavengers, this is from 1835, the scavengers are appointed in the same manner. The persons usually selected for this office are the churchwardens and overseers of the poor, and they employ the paupers in sweeping the streets. So there does always seem to have been this idea of keeping the streets clean. I guess, I mean, the way I'm imagining it is very much like, we're going to tax these guys because they're not from round here. All right, okay, it's kind of a dick move. What are you going to do with the money? We'll keep the streets clean.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah.
But anyway, then 1B, this is put on your colonial filter for a second.
Okay, yeah.
1B, as the title of an official under the East India Company, obsolete. This census given from 1702 to 1760. John Butt, scavenger and corn meter, Tevanapattam merchant. It's a manuscript list. And Mr. Handel applying to the board to have his allowance of scavenger increased. Now, given that a scavenger prior to 1702 was a person who collected taxes and kept things clean. I do not wish to know any more details about what the East India Company's scavengers did. Thank you very much. Probably not good.
Yeah. Safe bet.
So, sense 2A, 1530, we've very much got the sense of a person whose employment is to clean streets by scraping or sweeping together and removing dirt. Also a person employed to keep a church clean. So there is this sort of implied sense that the people who are keeping things clean are not terribly wealthy. They do not have a high social status. And I think that's interesting that we go from taxman to pauper and dirty pauper at that within, not even 100 years. In 1596, we get the transferred meaning of one who or something which removes dirt or putrid matter. And of course, that's then applied to various animals that feed on decaying matter. Right. So there's the scavenger beetle, for example. And we have that from 1596 all the way to the last citation that we do is 1899. And they're talking there about spider cells. And then the figurative sense, so somebody who collects filth becomes somebody who does dirty work, but also a dishonourable person. So we start to get this sort of pejorative sense where a scavenger is unpleasant and morally unclean. But it also continues to be used in a favourable sense as someone who labours for the removal of public evils. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
We get a child employed in a spinning mill to collect loose cotton lying about the floor or machinery. And this, I think, is interesting. This is from 1833. And this is the first time that the sense that I would, if somebody had marched up to me and said, what does the word scavenger mean? This is the sort of sense that I would have given it. The notion of taking loose extra stuff, picking up the shit that nobody else really wants.
Yeah.
But for a useful purpose. That's kind of, that would have been my general understanding of a scavenger. But the OED does not mention this kind of colouring of it at all. It's just picking things up, taking things, cleaning things, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And etymologically,
I don't know that I would have had the for a useful purpose addendum on that necessarily, although I guess I do. I guess the first thing I think of when I think of a scavenger is it would be an animal. Right. And I guess I'm usually thinking of them eating, like finding food in discard and like seagulls on the beach or at the dump or whatever, like
stuff that is lying around.
And so I guess that would be useful. I think where I'm kind of seeing an interesting break from what I would have expected is I thought it was going to be a pejorative from the beginning as a reflection on the tax collecting nature of it.
Well, yeah.
Because I definitely think of it as for a selfish purpose. Like you don't scavenge for others or you're not scavenging on behalf of someone else or to provide some sort of public service. You're gathering things. It's stuff left behind by other, but this is mine now.
Yeah.
Like the Thénardiers in Les Miserables going, getting the gold teeth from the bodies of the soldiers and stuff.
It's mine.
Exactly. Like that sense of I'm going to take that because you've left it unguarded or discarded or whatever. So it's interesting that it kind of did that, but by way of a public service, like keeping the streets clean. Like, yeah. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's definitely not what I was expecting. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting scavy to pop up somewhere. Yeah. But when we look at the etymology of the word, that's not a thing. They are very different things. And that's because they come from two very different PIE roots. Okay. So I love cognates. I love discovering that words are unexpectedly related to each other. But I also kind of love discovering that words are not in any way related to each other when I thought they might be. And there's no, for me, you know, when I'm kind of looking at these things, there's no better kind of confirmation of that than saying, well, actually, in whichever year pie was a thing, these two words were from completely different root words. And so Etymonline points out that scavenger is a modification of Middle English scavenger, which is from Middle English scavenge, the toll, which is from Old North French escavage, which means inspection. Now, it comes from Old North French, but it's definitely a Germanic word. We have Old High German skuon and Old English skeon, to look at or to inspect. And these earlier versions of the word scavenge give us, they all ultimately come from the same place that show comes from. Middle English schuan, from Old English skewan, which means to look at or see or gaze at or behold or observe or inspect, examine, look for or choose. And these all come from the PIE root K-E-U-Q, to see, observe or perceive. And the cognates that we get from this word, they include scavenger, but also words like caution and caveat, kudos, show, sheen, and scone. Not scone, scone. Okay?
Yeah.
And I feel absolutely fine about saying that because Etymonline tells me that it's a Scots word. Anyway.
Oh, nice.
So I feel I'm in charge of those. I've appointed myself unofficial guardian of the Scots language around these parts, and it's scone, okay?
Fair enough.
Although the small town where I teach Pilates, which is a lovely studio, whose name is spelled exactly the same as the word scone, as in the flat, uninteresting cake, that is not pronounced scone, that's pronounced scoon, just to confuse the visitors.
Just because, yeah.
I think, yeah. The kings of Scotland were crowned upon the stone of Scone, which is currently in the museum in Perth, which is not very far from Scone, or indeed from Dundee. But, yeah. Anyway, from Scone and scone, these are all words that come from this PIE root. Yeah. Which, given that there are lots of methods and ways to see, it gives us a whole load of cognates. So if we look at the hypothetical source of evidences for the PIE root, we have words like the Avestan, which means seer or poet or wise man. We get Middle Iranian, the word means splendour or majesty. Old Church Slavonic gives us wonder. We have Old Church Slavonic. Czech, the word is to perceive or to be aware of. The Serbian word is to watch or to heed. And the Old English word is to look at. So it's, as always happens with pirates, you get a very, very wide range of cognates in a variety of different languages. But interesting, and that KEU pirate, very, I was about to say very clearly, in as much as etymology is ever clear about anything, this is where this word is coming from.
Yeah.
Now, scavi, on the other hand, the word that started me wondering about this thing and the whole thing in the first place, comes from the Italian verb scavo. And scavo, as soon as I saw the translation, which I'd never bothered to look up because I assumed it meant ruins, means excavation. And in fact, the Italian word scavo, you're like, oh, this is so crushingly obvious, I may actually be crushed. And scavo, of course, comes from excavare, which the Latin word, excavo, which means to hollow out or excavate. And as soon as the word excavate pops up, you're like, oh my goodness me, what an idiot. You're such a tourist, good grief. And I love that. I saw it on a map and on a train route like 3 or 4 times, and I took what I already thought I knew about that place and I gave it a meaning. And I think that given that we see that sort of development in etymology all the damn time.
Yeah.
Well, we're just going to do this now because this is kind of what I think it should be. I thought that was quite fitting for a word that suddenly developed an N in the 1500s for no damn reason. Excavo, which which comes from a completely different PIE root. And in this case, the PIE root it's also spelled Keu, just to confuse you, but it means to swell. And the University of Texas at Austin Linguistics Research Center, Indo-European Lexicon of PIE, etymon, and IE reflexes.
Never gets old.
Never gets old. Has this etymon to swell, and it becomes. It basically it gives us words that have to do with openings, large spaces, caves, holes. Things that swell and things that have vaults. So there are so many cool cognates from this PIE root, including excavation. So we have words like accumulate, things that pile up and get bigger, as in they swell. We have cave and cavern, but we also have church.
Oh.
And diapason. I was delighted to see the word diapason. Do you know what it means?
I have no idea.
It's a type of organ stop.
I'm sorry, what?
An organ stop.
Okay, I know what both of those words mean by themselves.
Oh, I thought I had come out of my particular geeky niche and inserted some more universal appeal, but I am still quite well hidden in the geeky niche. A stop is the set of pipes on an organ that produce a particular sound.
Oh, okay.
So when you pull all the stops out,
pulling out all, okay.
you literally
Is that where that comes from?
Yep. And on pipe organs that are still pipe organs and are not electronic, you literally pull out a knob, and that activates that particular rank of pipes, which adds that set of sounds to the existing set of sounds. So when you pull out all the stops, you make the organ as loud as it can possibly be.
Interesting.
Also,
That's neat.
dear listener, I was once a church organist. Don't know if I've ever mentioned that before, actually. Could be... I
feel like maybe it's...
probably. I mean, it's been a lot of years. Who knows? Anyway, so because of that, a diapason is a particular type of stop, and I thought, hey, beautiful, because you just don't see that many geeky organ words kicking around all that often. So we get cave and cavern. We also get cavity. Interestingly, we get celiac. Now, this is because the word koiliak in Greek means bowels, which are indeed a cavity that swells of sorts. We also get church and codeine. Not too sure where the swelling is coming from, but codeine is a cognate of this PIE root. We get concave and cumulate and cumulus clouds. We get excavate. We also get kirk, the Scottish word for church.
Right, yeah.
And Kyrie, as in Kyrie eleison.
Okay.
We get panacea and pancreas. We also get pandemic, widespread, swelling, getting bigger quickly.
Okay, yeah.
And lots of pan words, pantheon and panorama and all these different things. So a word that, rather a lot grows from rather a small amount, which is exactly what the word means. So you can scavenge or you can excavate, but you cannot, well, at least etymologically, you cannot do both. But by digging into one word, I did find that there was a whole lot more underneath than I was expecting.
Nice.
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.